what are some of the other negotiations that you've been involved with that kind of come to mind that, okay, I enjoy that process and the outcome?
The one that might be the most memorable for me is Daniel Jones. I was on the golf course on a Saturday morning. I get a call and he says, hey, I have this master plan. We're going to send a proposal to the Giants on Monday. It's going to be a whole history of the quarterback market and where Daniel fits into it. So I spent the next 72 hours building out a 42-page manifesto. I think the Giants called it. It was absurd at the time. Looking back, it's still absurd, but it inevitably got us to the point where we did a buzzer beater deal where there were seconds left before the deadline when we got his contract done.
Welcome in. It is the Tuesday, June 24 edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. I am your host, Ari Meirov. It is a Tuesday. That means we have a special Spotlight guest of the week. And for the first time here on the show, we are going into the agent world for a guest on the show. And we will be joined by AJ Stevens, the VP of Client Strategy for Athletes First, one of the biggest agencies, regardless of sport, in the United States. And AJ works directly with all of their player agents when it comes to the NFL, and he helps them negotiate and strategize how to get players the very best contracts for them at their point in their career. You look at the client list at A1, you have Dak Prescott, the highest paid quarterback in NFL history, the first ever $60 million per year player. You think of players like Fred Warner, Derek Stingley, Aaron Donald, Brian Burns, Penei Sewell, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, J.C. Horn, even kickers and punters, highest paid punter Michael Dixon, soon to be Brandon Aubrey in Dallas. They basically have all of it, and that is all Athletes First, and AJ is a huge part of those negotiations, a true behind-the-scenes guy, somebody who I guess the average fans don't really know much about, but a perfect spotlight guest here for the show as we shed a spotlight on his career, his path, his journey, some behind-the-scenes stories, and much more. So here it is, my full 40-plus minute discussion with AJ Stevens of Athletes First. Joining us today here on NFL Spotlight, he is the VP of Client Strategy for Athletes First. The CEO of the company called him the very best negotiator there is. He's helped negotiate deals with Dak Prescott, Derrick Henry, Brian Burns, and countless others. And he previously worked for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 4 years. It is AJ Stevens. AJ, that's a long intro. You've done a lot in this league. Thanks for coming on. How's everything going?
Good, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
For sure. And, I love having people like you on the show because this is the NFL Spotlight Show. We love spotlighting people in the league who deserve more recognition. And you're truly like a behind the scenes guy, but people in the agent industry and the team side, they kind of call you a star. And I kind of want to hear more about you and how you got to this point and the entire journey. And I think it's a very unique one that I think the listeners would love to hear about. So I'm just going to start with this. Like, how did you first get started in the football industry? Were you always into the salary cap and the CBA from a young age? Did somebody inspire you? Like, how did this entire, I guess, life start for you?
Yeah. I mean, humbling that you've heard anything of me, to be honest. It's still kind of surreal to hear my name brought up in the NFL circles. So, my start in the league really starts, it goes back to me trying to decide how I was going to get into football. I was in college and, I was thinking about like, how do I get into working in the industry? And I remember thinking back to, when I was a kid playing Madden, and I really just would fast forward to the end of the season and then just do all of the free agency and the draft and everything. And then fast forward through the season again and see how the team did and do it all over. And so that's really what I was most interested in, was the roster building and the allocation of resources and all that type of stuff. So I started just going through bios of front offices and seeing, what were the paths that people took to get into those type of roles. So a lot of people went to law school. So I started looking into law schools, and specifically law schools that had an alumni that was in the NFL, or someone who, or a program that had sports law specifically. And that, led me to a couple different schools, but ultimately I chose Tulane because I sat down with the sports law director down there who's renowned in the industry. And he said, if you want to work in the salary cap, we had someone who came here 3 years ago. He had the same dreams as you. He wants to work in the NFL. He just graduated, and now he's the salary cap guy for the Chicago Bears. So I walked out of that meeting with him, looked at my dad and said, like, let's go to the bookstore and buy some Tulane gear because this is where I need to be. So that's where I started going to law school. And really the entire time I was in law school, when my classmates are reading Concrim Pro and going through, all of the regular legal studies, I'm reading the NFL CBA. And I was, kind of poring over it, like taking notes. I still have my original CBA where it just has notes all over and highlights that didn't necessarily make sense now that I look back at it. But that's really what I was, I put at the forefront of what I was doing in law school. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of just little side random salary cap projects that I was cold emailing to every football administration person in the NFL. Just getting on calls and any advice that I could get from people in front offices. I try to get an ear and see if I could talk to them. And that landed me an internship with the Washington Redskins with Eric Schaefer, who was the vice president of the team at the time. He was doing both general counsel side and the football administration side. So he told me, we don't have a football admin intern, but you seem very interested. You're a law student. So I'm going to call you a legal attorney or a legal intern, but we're going to have you do some admin stuff too. So that was really my first step in the door in the NFL was working with Eric and just getting to sit and hear how things happen behind the scenes. And I knew, not long into that internship, 2-3 weeks into it, where I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I really enjoyed being around the team, seeing the ins and outs of how organizations are run. And so that summer I was working on a side project, I guess you will, of creating this negotiation competition strictly for law students. And I was going to host it at Tulane. So the idea behind it was that we were going to invite other law students to come and mock negotiate NFL contracts. And so we're putting together all of, what it would take for this to come together, inviting schools. And most importantly for me anyway, was I was inviting people from front offices and I was inviting agents, and those people were going to come and judge the negotiations. I was looking at it as an opportunity to network with all those people. I wasn't going to negotiate any of the deals. I was going to write the problems and then watch the schools negotiate. But the entire time that all of these executives were in New Orleans at Tulane, I was going to be rubbing elbows with them, trying to get a job. And so that, and a combination of my internship and obviously my cold calls and just being very persistent with everyone, ended up getting me a job with the Buccaneers. Started the day after I took the bar, which was exhausting, but that was my first step into a full-time role in the NFL.
I never realized that Tulane thing, which everybody has brought up to me. I mean, our mutual friend Brad Spielberger talks about it all the time as well. I never realized that you were the person who actually started it. And I believe we've hit, is it 10 years already that it's been going on?
Yeah, I think this last year was the 11th year that it was held.
11 years.
So to date,
Unbelievable.
there.
And that's a unique approach by you to think about doing that, and of course helping others, but at the same time helping yourself connect with other people and lead to where you end up in Tampa Bay. And on the team side with the Buccaneers, you were there for 4 years, and this was kind of during their little rebuild, and they were not the greatest team in the world at that time, but you worked with some incredible people who were there. We had John Spivak on the show a few weeks ago. He was there. But Jason Light, the GM, Mike Greenberg is their salary cap guru there who does all the contracts. What did you learn from being around those two guys in particular who are still there and just tremendous at what they do?
Yeah, and they're all great. The Buccaneers have a great front office with a lot of really smart people who are going to be high level executives around the league in the future. My first job coming in there and working directly for Mike Greenberg was to do a lot of the research and the dirty work and everything that kind of falls between the cracks that needs to get done and needs to have put in front of the person making the decisions. So everything CBA related, salary cap related, just doing advanced studies on how teams were being built, how successful teams were allocating their resources, anything that teams were doing differently, and even in undrafted free agency where you don't see a lot of guys coming and making a huge difference. But if there was any edge that we could find, I was trying to find that advantage for us, and even looking at which direction you should kick in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers stadium, because it creates a bit of a wind tunnel, and we know how the Bucs have had their struggles with kickers. So there was endless things that I was doing some of the dirty work on and presenting to them. I learned an incredible amount from all those guys, from Jason especially. Prioritizing the character of people over some of the other attributes that people will see on film and say, well, this guy should be a high valued player, and prioritizing how is he going to develop and what will we think of him long term. I think is something that doesn't necessarily get talked about, but is a very big part of why the Buccaneers have been so successful. And then everything I learned from Greenberg, he was a huge mentor to me, and how he viewed the salary cap and how he manages relationships inside the building and everything that he does. So it was a great place to start my career.
Yeah, I mean, Mike is somebody who I think will become a GM in this league at some point. He's been in Tampa Bay for a very long time. Got his start with my boss, Mike Tannenbaum, with the Jets, came over to Tampa, was there even before Jason got there, and Jason retained him. And I think that was one of the best decisions he's made ever since he got there almost 10, 11, 12 years ago. But you mentioned before when you got to Washington that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be around the team. I wanted to be involved with these organizations. And had you have stayed in Tampa, you probably would have climbed up the front office rank because you clearly were a pretty big deal there. But after 4 years there, you end up leaving. It's not because you wanted to leave, but you got a phone call. Could you go into just how that changed your entire life of no longer being part of a team and kind of flipping?
Yeah, no, it was a surprise to me. It was a random call from an agent, Todd France. I saw it show up on my caller ID, and I thought maybe he was calling about one of his clients and couldn't reach Jason and couldn't reach Greenberg, and he had trickled down the totem pole to call me. But it was a bit of a recruiting call. He wanted to bring me over to the agency side of the business to work with him specifically on contracts and have a very contract focused role on the agency side, not something that I had looked into. I had went to law school with the specific intent of working in an NFL front office. I was in that role now and was working, building myself up in my career. But the opportunity to go somewhere and be the central contract focal point for 250 players was something that I couldn't just dismiss. And so throughout the next 5-6 months, we were in the process of negotiating Tom Brady's contract to get him to the Bucs. We go throughout the rest of the offseason, and we put together a very solid roster. And at that point, it's very difficult for me to say, like, I want to walk away from this team and go to the agency side. But, COVID is hitting, and there's a lot of, question marks about, is there even going to be a season? What is the business going to look like? And so I ultimately decide what I think is going to be best for me in my career as a negotiator and doing the part of the job that I like the most, which is doing deals and negotiating contracts. I made that switch to come over and work with Todd, and eventually at Athletes First, where they kind of had a vision for me to basically run a football administration department for this massive agency, the biggest agency in the NFL. And rather than having a position in a team where you have 53 guys on the roster or 90 in the offseason, this was 250 plus on-field NFL clients who, there's always going to be deals going on. There's always going to be really good clients who need contracts. And so my job was really going to be looking at all of those deals and all those markets at all the time. And that was something that was really intriguing to me, and ultimately what I decided to do.
People who don't know, Todd is one of the biggest agents the NFL has. He's had first round picks since I believe 2005 and has done some of the biggest contracts in the NFL, including the biggest one right now, which is Dak Prescott, $16 million per year. I am curious to know, like, what was the exact pitch that he gave you? Because I don't think people know this as well, but he actually was not with Athletes First yet when this happened. So your world kind of flipped upside down a couple of times throughout that recruiting pitch.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. The initial pitch was I was going to come work with just him and help him with all of his clients and the contract negotiation aspects. And then, like you said, he left CA a month after I had made the move over. And fortunately, he decided to leave to go to Athletes First, and Athletes First also saw Todd's vision for bringing me on. But it was actually an expanded vision because it went from me working with just Todd to also working with Brian Murphy and Ryan Williams and David Mulgeta and Andrew Kessler and Joe Panos and Justin Schulman and all of the agents at Athletes First. So it went from, with Todd, 60 or so clients to all of the agents at Athletes First, 250 plus. So it was a bit of a transition and trying to get up to speed, but it's something I've really enjoyed doing.
So Brian Murphy, who's the CEO of Athletes First, and I mentioned before, he called you the best negotiator there is, which is a pretty big statement. But he said on the Athletes First podcast with you, which you're a co-host of, that he was a bit hesitant at first, and now he realized he was wrong. But he said that you transformed how the company does contracts, which is another pretty big statement. Like, what are some of the things that you brought with you that I guess they had never seen before, which has kind of transformed how they do contracts?
Yeah, I think part of it was they were a little bit isolationist, where each agent, they had their clients, and although they were under the same umbrella, if a team called one agent and said, "Hey, I want to negotiate with you," he would just go on his way negotiating in his own style without any input from any of the other agents or any communication across the company. And so when I became that contract focal point, I really became you know a person that could buffer all of those conversations and make sure that everyone was in the loop at all times. So when we were doing the quarterbacks last summer, 2 summers ago, whenever that was, and we had Tua and Jordan Love and Dak all in the conversations at the same time, we didn't have to worry about one agent calling the other because I was involved in all the conversations, and it was an easy relay of information that way, so that I could say, this is where this one's at, this is where this one's at, this is what we've heard, and really to be that buffer and to make sure that everything was working smoothly.
I do want to ask you about one of those quarterback contracts. You mentioned Dak, and it's been one of the best deals in the NFL from his first 4-year, $160 million deal in 2021 after multiple franchise tags, and then kind of holding the Cowboys with their hands tied last offseason to getting that unbelievable 4-year, $240 million deal, which is $60 million per year. Was the plan for you and Todd always to gain that leverage and roll the dice early in his career? Or were you guys like, we just didn't get the best offers and we kind of fell into this situation and now we have all the cards? Because I don't think there's ever been a quarterback situation that's been handled better than what Dak has done in Dallas, which is a credit to you guys.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. No, it was very strategic from the very first conversations with the Cowboys. They had a tradition of these long contracts where you look at, all of their guys going back, they're 5, 6, 7, even 10-year contracts. And so our focal point of that negotiation was we should have a 4-year contract because that's going to maximize the guarantees, where the 3 years are going to be guaranteed, and then we're going to be back at the table. And just looking at how quickly the quarterback market grows, that extra year is so important. So when other guys were signing 10-year contracts, we were looking at saying, if we can do a 4-year contract, we're going to get 2+ contracts in that same window, and the salary cap is going to be 100% up during that time. So it was 100% very, very strategic and planned on our side, where we were thinking about, how do we eliminate their ability to use franchise tags? How do we force them to the table early on in the off season if we're at a situation where he hasn't played up to it or the things haven't gone well? Like, how do we make sure that we get to free agency at the start of March rather than a potential pay cut conversation in July or August? So every aspect of the deal was like, we sat for months, it felt like, just going back and forth on what else do we need to make this the perfect contract and to set us up for 3 years from now when the cap is way up and we're back at the table negotiating that third deal for Dak. And when we're talking about the $60 million per year, there is still conversations of we got to be thinking about 3 years from now when the cap is up even more and Dak is looking for one more deal before the end of his career.
Yeah, I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving with that contract. So it's quite incredible. They can't franchise tag him, they can't trade him. The cap number keeps on going up. It's It's unbelievable, and I think he will have one more bite of the apple here at the end of his career as well. But how important is it? And I don't know how involved you are when it comes to this, of getting the player to believe in the plan, because we all know about the injury risk and wanting the security. And Dak was a fourth round pick, so he's barely made money in his career. How important is it just to get the player to believe in your plan? And was Dak always all in on this with what you and Todd wanted to do here?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to have the player on board. Ultimately, they're the decision maker. So when you're thinking through, what is our strategy, what is going to make the most sense for the player in the long term, you don't look at it as like, oh, how do I convince them or how do I manipulate them into thinking what I want? You lay out the facts that we find to be very compelling as to why we should do it this way, and ultimately the some of the players are going to say, well, I hired you to do this, so go ahead and handle it, and some of them are going to want to be very educated, and so we sat down specifically with Dak multiple times on multiple occasions to say, hey, this is what's on the table. Here's the risks that are involved. Here's what we think if the worst case scenario happens. Here's what you're still going to walk away with. If the best case scenario happens, then here's what we're going to end up with if we say yes or if we say no. And really just having that sliding scale of risk and reward and going through with him, and ultimately it's up to the player to decide, what is their tolerance for risk, and what is the reward at the end of the rainbow.
Mentioned before how you guys had Tua and Jordan Love and Dak all at the same time. Just how great is it to have multiple players at the same position who are all in need of a payday, and just having that collaboration between all sides of Europe, knowing this is where we're at, this is where you're at, this is what we think it's going to go to. Like, how key is that, and how much do you guys rely on, even though it's different agents in each situation? Like Tua was Ryan and Jordan was David, and obviously Dak was Todd. But at least having that communication, knowing all of you are under the same umbrella.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, that's the strength of the big agency and the strength of Athletes First. I think we look at that as something that if we weren't taking advantage of that, we'd be doing a disservice to our clients. And so that constant line of communication, and that's a good example with the quarterbacks, but we do it at multiple positions almost every year, where we are able to gather all of the information about each player from each team and really kind of look at it from a much broader scope and say, this is the one that's going to make the most sense for everyone involved. And so this is the way that we should approach this. And that could be whether it's timing. So, this guy should go first because then this one's going to build on it, or they should continue to negotiate around the same time. All of those things, it's information that we can use to leverage the deal the way we want to.
You mentioned before how, again, there are so many agents there at A1, and you're involved now with all of them, even though initially when you joined Todd, you thought it's only Todd, and now all of a sudden you have all these other guys that you're working with. Aside from Dak, which I would imagine is the most memorable one you have, what are some of the other negotiations that you've been involved with that kind of come to mind that, okay, I enjoy that process and the outcome? I know Brian Burns was one which I was fascinated by, but like, what are some other ones where it might have taken some time, but eventually you guys got the results you guys wanted?
Yeah, I think the quarterbacks are always memorable because it's just the position and the aura that comes with doing a quarterback deal. That's why we have the podcast that we did where it's all about the quarterback deals. But anytime you're doing a record-setting deal, whether it's Aaron Donald's deal that we reset the top of the market by over $10 million per year, that was super memorable. And just everything that went into doing a negotiation for a player that had 3 years left and was 31 years old, and possibly, well, in my opinion, the best defensive player in NFL history. The difficulty of doing a trade and new deal like we did with Brian Burns, I think the level of difficulty that makes it, you feel even more like proud of your work at the end of it because it had those challenges. Derek Stingley's deal this year, where just pushing the top of the market so much and having people say like, how impressive they thought it was. Those types of things are great. I think the one that might be the most memorable for me, though, and because of the way that Brian Murphy, our CEO, pushed us at the beginning of it, is Daniel Jones. And I will never forget, I was on the golf course on a Saturday morning thinking I was, free and clear for the weekend. I get a call and he says, "Hey, I have this master plan. We're going to send a proposal to the Giants on Monday. It's going to be a whole history of the quarterback market and where Daniel fits into it." So I spent the next 72 hours building out a 42-page manifesto, I think the Giants called it, that gave a history of the quarterback position since 2010-ish, and eventually a proposal. So you had to read through 41 pages to actually see our first proposal to the Giants. It was, it was absurd at the time. Looking back, it's still absurd, but it inevitably got us to the point where we did a buzzer beater deal where there were seconds left before the deadline when we got his contract done. So that one was super memorable for me.
Yeah, I remember that also. Like it was yesterday. It was 4 years, 160, right before the franchise tag deadline. As a result, Saquon got tagged, and Daniel made it was shocking to a lot of people that he was able to make that deal. And hearing how, and I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, he also switched agencies to you guys, which also made it a bit of a complicated timeline for all of you. But you still found a way to get that buzzer beater deal before the deadline. So kudos to all of you for doing that. One more thing that you mentioned, and I know you briefly talked about it, but Derek Stingley's deal was a 3-year, $90 million deal. $30 million per year was a big jump. The 3 years is unbelievable. You kind of mentioned before about doing shorter term deals, and we keep on seeing these players do 5, 6, 7, 10-year deals. Why is that so important to you to try to limit the years and getting Derek to do 3 and the Texans to agree on it? It's like, I think it's one of your biggest keys you have when it comes to like, why is that so important to you?
Yeah, no, term is super important in all negotiations, in all contracts. One of the main aspects of all NFL contracts is, they aren't fully guaranteed. Outside of Deshaun Watson's, there aren't long-term fully guaranteed deals. And so any year after the guarantees run out, it basically becomes a team option. And the team gets to decide going into that year, is this player worth the amount of cash we have to pay him this year, or can we look for another route? And so when you think about term, you think about limiting those years that are quote unquote team options, where there aren't those a long number of unguaranteed years, but also the growth of the salary cap and the growth of the positional markets and how much a player can cash in their short career. Because ultimately these guys aren't playing 15, 20 years in the NFL. They have a fairly short career window. And so to maximize that, you want to hit their first veteran contracts as quickly as possible. And then you want to try and give yourself an opportunity to hit a third contract while they're still in the prime earning years of a player at their position, which is, it's different for every position, of course, but being able to get that third bite at the apple that includes more guarantees and, another big deal, that's not going to happen when you sign a 6-7 year deal, because ultimately then you end up in your 30s before you're looking for another deal.
Exactly. And that's why the deal that Derek did, and of course Dak did, which was 4 years, and they had to go back to the table because there was no tag. Derek getting 3 years plus $30 million per year is incredible. I think most teams would never give you the short term plus the crazy new average, which they did. So it's great perspective, and I wish more fans understood it. And you guys have that down, and I feel like you guys know we're not going to do 5, 6, 7, 10 years ever, because of your perspective, which I believe the industry probably knew already, but you've hammered it into them ever since you got there. I do want to ask you some general NFL questions, which I think you would be very knowledgeable on this and give some really, really good perspective. And I want to start with a question that I asked any salary cap guys around the NFL, and they all have differing opinions, but I feel like you're going to have a good one as well. Why don't more cap guys become GMs in the NFL? Why is it usually a scout who gets that role? Because I feel like it's much easier to hire a cap guy as GM and then have your assistant GM be the scouting guy. Why is it always the other way around?
So, I mean, I think it's looking back traditionally at what the role of GM has been in the NFL. Teams, ownership, and general managers have primarily looked at the roster as something that you build through the draft. And ultimately, the decision makers in the draft and the most knowledgeable people about the draft are scouts. So traditionally, they've looked at it and said, we need to have the best scout possible in that GM role so that when they're building the roster, we have the best person available to do that. I think now that, things have changed a little bit as far as the perception of the role of GM. I think the role of GM has changed itself, where you have to be more of a CEO, and you're doing a lot of ancillary duties that are not sitting back watching film and picking players. You have to be a spokesman for the team. You have to be looking at all the other things that go into building and maintaining a roster that aren't necessarily just scouting. So I think it's traditionally, it hasn't been a way that ownerships want to build their front office. They've always thought they need to have the best scout. But I think as time goes on and teams start to look for their edge, they're going to say, we need to look at, other people and other backgrounds that will help us to build the best franchise.
I think there are so many guys around the league who are worthy, and I think fans sometimes don't realize how much is on a plate of a GM. It's not just picking players and building a roster. There's setting a budget, and there's all these different money stuff that a college director never knew even existed. And then you become a GM. It's like, where in the world is this? So I feel like there's a lot of guys who are in that cap world who would do a much better job when it comes to all the other stuff. And then you could hire a scout to be your assistant GM, and that would be the way to go. But for whatever reason, it really hasn't happened much. But you're somebody who obviously negotiates with many teams, are involved with those phone calls. Are there some guys in front offices who right now you believe should be GM candidates in the NFL here in the future? I'm sure you have many names, but like one or two that you feel like would make sense.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna preface this with, like, there are a lot of guys around the league that I think are fully capable of being general managers. There's only 32 jobs, so not everyone is always gonna have the opportunity to get into that position. But there's a number of guys around the league, from Kai Harley in New Orleans, who everyone talks about the cap gymnastics that they do, and a lot of it is because he is so good at managing the cap, and he's been an expert at it. Mike Greenberg, obviously, I think he's a guy that if he wants to be a GM, he'll have the opportunity to. Mike Disner in Detroit, another person who, if he wanted to be a GM, he probably would have been by now. I'm not sure he actually wants to be in that role. But Jake Rosenberg, another person who, he helped build the Eagles front office and roster, and he's amazing in that space and fully capable. Chris Shea with the Chiefs, another one. I know Brant Tillis, obviously he's gotten a couple interviews and got an elevated role with the Panthers, but another person who has the ability. It's just a matter of if teams are willing to look down that path.
There's so many great guys. Chris Shea has been here on the show in the past, just got promoted to assistant GM in Kansas City. Brent Tillis was featured a lot in the Panthers YouTube behind the scenes of their war room. Very, very much involved there with Dan Morgan. But so many deserving guys. Mike Greenberg has been somebody who has been mentioned as a potential guest here on the show. And everybody you've mentioned, like, these are guys who I wish you just get more interviews, at least more looks. And I feel like they still don't get enough of those. A couple more questions here, just general ones. Could you ever see a scenario where an NFL agent is able to transition to a GM? And it happens in other sports. Basketball has it. Rob Pelinka with the Lakers, Leon Rose with the Knicks. My Mets once had a Brody Van Wagenen who was an agent who became a GM. It's never really happened in the NFL. Is that something that can happen in the future, you think?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely can, as the general manager role. It progresses into more of a CEO type position, where it's not necessarily being a lead scout. It's more of a delegator of roles and being able to elevate people around you to do the roles that it entails, and then executing those processes. So having someone with an agent background who has been able to negotiate with and see how every team around the league operates, and understand what has been more compelling to him in negotiations and what has been less impressive as you go through your career. I think there's a lot of things that you can learn on the agent side of the table that would translate to working in an NFL front office and in a general manager role. Now, you'd have to rely on someone who has a big scouting acumen, and someone as your right-hand man to make a lot of the draft decisions, of course, because that's ultimately where a lot of the roster is going to come from. And you'd have to rely on your operations people and your salary cap people. So it's not something that no GM comes in and does all those things anyway. So it's something that I think potentially down the road, ownership may start looking at it because again, every team is looking for that edge, and sometimes you have to think outside the box.
Yeah, that word edge. I've been waiting for that. We've interviewed so and so agent. I'm just waiting for that to happen. And like everyone goes crazy. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm just waiting for a team to do it because it's happened in other sports. I think it's unique. They obviously speak to every single team throughout the year. They do recruiting to find their players. So there is an element of it where I could see it happening. It just hasn't happened yet in the NFL. All right. Last couple ones here before I wrap up. Um, Contracts, whenever deals are broken on Twitter, everyone just reacts to the raw numbers. No one really sees the full details. But what is the biggest misconception about contracts that fans don't truly understand right away?
So I think there's two main ones, which is the average salary. Everyone talks about, that's the first thing that gets advertised is the APY, and this is a record breaking deal based on the average per year. Ultimately, we focus more on the actual cash flow of the deal, and if we say a deal averages $30 million per year, but through 3 of the 4 years it averages 25, we don't value that as a $30 million per year deal. Like that might make him the 10th highest paid at his position if it's 25 rather than the advertised 30. So just because it says average per year is X dollars doesn't mean that that's how much the player makes every year. The deal, it could be front loaded in a lot of cases where, like we have a quarterback whose deal had $100 million in the first year of the deal, but it only averages 52. So there can be very front-loaded deals, and then in the inverse, there can be back-loaded deals where there's a huge number at the end that makes the player look like he's making a lot more on the average, but he's not. And then the second thing is salary cap hits. A lot of people focus on, the salary cap hit is this, so we have to get rid of the player. Not understanding that the way that salary cap people and the roster builders around the league are looking at it is once we get to that year, we're simply going to prorate that salary cap hit out because the salary cap ultimately it's going to be a team decision what the cap hit is in any given year because every veteran deal in the NFL has a caveat, a clause in it that says the team can convert base salary into signing bonus and reduce that cap hit to almost any number they want. So those are the two biggest misconceptions I think that fans and we see it on Twitter all the time of people not understanding that.
Yeah, I wish more people did some more deep dives into some of these contracts to see the actual raw details and not just go by APY. I fall for it also sometimes, but sometimes I really try to break down exactly what a contract is. And there's so many more details. You mentioned the $100 million in year one. That was Justin Herbert, an incredible deal there for him. Also negotiated there by, I believe it was Justin Schulman, right? Of Athletes First. So, and you guys helped out as well. All right. One more thing here before I ask the final question to ask everybody. Everyone's already talking about an 18th game, which needs the discussion with the union, which would be related to the CBA. If there was one thing you would change about the CBA, what would it be? Do you want players to get the free agency earlier, removing the franchise tag? Like, if there's one thing you could do to help out
Yeah,
as an agent, which will
I
help.
think I'm getting rid of the franchise tag. It would just force teams' hands so much earlier in the negotiation process when you're talking about a player with 1 year left. A lot of times when you're sitting there saying, well, he's only got 1 year left, so if we don't do it now, he'll be a free agent next year. But ultimately, the team has the opportunity to say, well, there's 1 year left plus a franchise tag and plus a second franchise tag. And so really the team has so much leverage that way that they can use to try and, manipulate the market and to devalue the player. Because if they did get to the open market, we've seen guys who, most teams are saying, oh, he's worth this. And then he gets the free agency and a bidding war begins and he ends up with a contract that is way higher. So, the franchise tag is something that is, it's incredibly harmful for the open market of players.
Definitely agree. I've been advocating it forever. I think the owners want to keep it. It's not the way it's used right now is not what it was initially made for. Teams are obviously taking advantage of it, and it's not good for the players. And I wish more fans understood that. People think it's like, oh wow, he's getting $20 million for 1 year. It's you could get way more if he makes it to the open market. And I wish fans understood that. All right, AJ, I want to ask you the final question I ask every guest who comes here on the show. This is the NFL Spotlight Show. We love spotlighting people who deserve more recognition. You could pick a player, a coach, an executive, an agent, whoever you want around the NFL. Who is somebody who deserves to be in this seat in the future?
Got it. So, I mean, Mike Greenberg, but I watched the Spy Tech episode here that you had a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to double down on Greenberg. I'm going to say Mike Disner with the Lions. He's a guy that's at the forefront of all things salary cap. He's been in the league for a long time. He's one of the best in the league at everything he does, it seems. So if you want to get somebody on before they're a team president or before he's a GM, that's your guy.
We're going to start working on Mike Disner. I know he interviewed, I believe, for the Panthers GM job a couple years ago, but his name needs some more pop. He definitely deserves it. What the Lions have done, the front office has done. He's been there for a long time. He's somebody who deserves some more spotlight. I love that pick. And AJ, I just want to thank you for coming on, sharing your insights about your career, your journey, the path, shedding light on the amazing work you're doing there at Athletes First. And best of luck moving forward, continued success, and looking forward to see what else is to come here at Athletes First.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Special thanks to AJ Stevens of Athletes First for being our spotlight guest of the week. A very, very fun conversation there. And like I said in the intro, a true behind the scenes person here in the NFL, somebody who works tirelessly and really grinded to get to where he is today. Always wanted to be part of the NFL, thought it would be when it's, with a team, and of course ends up on this side with the agent side and working with some of the most powerful agents we have in the game of football and truly revolutionizing a lot of what Athletes First does when it comes to contracts around the NFL. We spoke about all the contracts in the beginning, all the players they have. They have a lot more deals coming up over here later in the summer, but this is what they do. This is what AJ is a very, very big part of. And the contracts they get, it's not like basketball and baseball where basically everything is fully guaranteed. There are some finer details in there that really tell you the full story when it comes to a contract. AJ knows all of it really well, and that is a really, really big part of picking your agent around the NFL for all players. And you look at the contracts they've done, some of the best ones we have here in the NFL, and AJ plays a very, very big role in all of that. So special thanks to him for joining us here on the show. That will do it here for our Tuesday, June 24 edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. Leave a comment. Do you want to see more guests like AJ, more behind the scenes people in the agent world here on the show? We, of course, have had executives here on the show in recent weeks, including Raiders GM John Spytek and Cardinals GM Monty Ossenford. If you have not seen that, go back a few weeks ago and go check it out. We have a full playlist over on our YouTube channel, but leave in the comment section, who do you think deserves to have a spotlight on them? Player, coach, executive, agent, somebody else behind the scenes, maybe a trainer, whoever you think deserves to be here on the show. Leave a comment, tell me on Twitter, DM me. I will take a look at it, and we will try to get them here on the show if they deserve a spotlight. We will be back here tomorrow morning talking more things around the NFL, the ripple effects, and much more. We will see you then.